It was snowing on this Halloween. Me and my friend group were all planning to have a big night of trick-or-treating, but with the snow coming down pretty heavily, a lot of their parents wouldn't let them out for too long. To be fair, it usually wasn't this bad in October around here, but for the last week, our city was in the middle of an early snowstorm. Anyway, it ended up being just me and my friends John and Hayden. They were still able and willing to go trick-or-treating. We all put on some heavy snow gear, boots, jackets, hats, all that stuff. Pretty much the only parts of our costumes you could see were the masks we were wearing. We started trick-or-treating. For the first couple hours, there were a decent amount of kids running around doing the same as us, but once the sun got lower, it was basically just us three, walking around in the snow. We continued going door to door, eventually getting up to one of the houses on the corner of the block. There was nothing unusual about it. We went up, knocked on the door, and got candy from the older woman that lived there, but it was when we turned to leave the porch that we walked past a man on the driveway. He had a thick jacket on, and a really creepy mask. More creepy than the typical ones you see, as this one looked kind of realistic, even having long black hair attached to it, draping over his shoulders. Hayden said he recognized the mask as Momo, which if you were around on the internet about a decade ago, you've probably heard of it. It's unsettling to say the least, but definitely not something most younger kids would be comfortable with seeing, even on Halloween. We all noticed him, and felt really weird about it. The man wasn't walking up or down the driveway. He was just standing there in the snow, watching us. We continued down the sidewalk, turning back a few times to look at him, but the blizzard quickly covered up our view of him. I think another thing that made us feel a little uneasy about it was that it was clearly a man, not a kid. He was tall, and completely alone out there. So what was he doing? John convinced us to skip a few houses, just to be safe. I don't think any of us wanted to run into that guy again. We crossed over to the next street and got back to going door to door. Have to say, the whiteout from the snow keeping us from seeing anything more than a house or two down the road made things a lot more uncomfortable. We had no idea if the man was still out there. I think 30 minutes passed. The sun was fully down, and even the streetlights were barely beaming through the falling snow. It was around then that John said he had to go back home, since his parents told him to be back by sundown, if it was still snowing. Hayden and I walked with him back to his house, then decided on what to do with just the two of us. I know it hadn't really been that long, but by this point, neither of us were thinking about that creepy man anymore. He hadn't actually done anything, and we never saw him following us, so we had no reason to keep thinking about it. Me and Hayden went to a few more doors and got some more candy, before we both were getting really cold and found ourselves just not enjoying it too much. So Hayden split ways and went back home, leaving me to head back to my house alone. It was about a 15-minute walk away, but in the snow, probably longer. Almost immediately, once it was just me out there, it hardly felt like Halloween. Snow covering every inch of the neighborhood, and nobody else walking around. Literally just me. Once I realized that, I started getting a little paranoid, looking all around and hoping to see another group of trick-or-treaters. But instead, I saw something else. On the other side of the street from the sidewalk I was on, there was a forest, and through the trees, someone was watching me. At first, I just saw his figure, standing far back, and mostly covered by the darkness and the falling snow. But as I continued walking and looking across the street, the figure moved with me, matching my pace and staying in view of me. I started to walk faster, eventually getting to a turn where I could go deeper into the neighborhood, where there were more houses and no forests. But the figure followed. He walked out of the tree line, and when he passed under a streetlight, I saw that same disturbing mask with the long black hair. He must have followed us the entire time, waiting for one of us to be alone. I hurried, moving as fast as I could. The empty and quiet streets made it feel like I was running for my life in an abandoned neighborhood. When I made it home, I locked the door behind me, but for some reason didn't tell my parents what was happening. I just went straight to my room. I guess I was scared to admit that I thought someone was actually following me, as if not admitting it would somehow make it not true. For a few minutes, I just sat on my bed and caught my breath, until the doorbell rang. I immediately felt a chill run through me, knowing that I saw no one else outside while I was running back home. I heard my parents talking, confused that any kids were still out trick-or-treating. My mom went and grabbed some of the candy that they'd already put away. Then she answered the door. As she did, I quietly walked around to the hallway and looked down at who was at the door. My stomach dropped. It was the tall man in the mask, and although I couldn't see his eyes, I know he saw me at the back of the hallway. He didn't even take any candy or say anything to my mom. He just walked away. Likely, the man was hoping I would be alone. My mom found it really creepy and strange, knowing as well that it was an adult, but she assumed it was just a dumb Halloween prank. I never told her what really happened, or what that man was really trying to do that night. My name is Jake, and at the time this happened, I was 29. It was the middle of autumn, and I had drove up to a rental cabin to stay at for a few days. It was a really nice but small cabin in the middle of the woods with a lake behind it. I'd been there a few times already, so it felt almost like a second home to me, somewhere to go when I wanted a short break from everyday life. The first day I got there, I unpacked and spent the whole afternoon settling in, then went out to the lake to watch the sunset. While out there, I noticed someone walking near the lake. Looked like they were walking the perimeter, not doing anything suspicious, so I didn't even think much about it. It was just something I noted. After the sun set, it got way too dark to be staying outside, so I headed back in. There wasn't actually too much to do inside the cabin, other than relax, so it sounds really boring, but I basically just sat on the sofa and chilled there, thinking to myself until I felt ready to go to bed. I turned off all the lights, double-checked the doors were locked, then went to the bedroom, and was on the verge of falling asleep when a sudden voice called out. "Hello? Anyone inside? Hello?" Someone was calling out for me outside of the cabin, asking if anyone was inside and knocking on the back door. I was so confused and weirded out, I opted to not say anything. Seemed to work, because after just a few minutes, the man walked away. I waited a while, then got up to look around. Couldn't see anything out there. I'm not sure how the guy was even walking around. Definitely creeped me out, but I closed all the curtains, then went back to bed. The rest of that night went smoothly. I woke up in the morning and had some coffee, and really did all the same that day. A couple times I thought about the unknown man that came by in the middle of the night, but with no other information, there wasn't all that much to think about. It was strange, but that was it. I stayed outside later this night though, having prepared a campfire so I could actually see. An hour or so into sitting out there, I heard some movement in the trees behind me. I turned and looked, but could barely see at all. I figured it was nothing, so I didn't pay it much attention. That was until it happened again. I looked back, but it was quiet. A strange, almost ominous feeling fell over me as I looked out there. I quickly smothered the fire and went back inside, taking one last look over at the woods before closing and locking the door. I could feel that something odd was going on, and I guess I was right, because not 10 minutes later, someone knocked on the back door again. He also called out, asking if I was inside. The man's voice was the same one that I heard last night. I was standing in the hallway, completely stunned. Eventually, after the man continued to knock and call out, I decided to slowly peer around the corner and look at the door. The man's eyes were already staring right at me. He looked disheveled and honestly horrified, that crazy look that insane people have. "Open the door. Please, let me in." I quickly went back behind the wall. The man was aggressive, trying to pressure me into letting him in. I could hear some amount of anger in his voice. I hurried to the bedroom and called 911. Disturbingly, the man must have somehow known, because soon after, he started banging on the bedroom window. He eventually got so aggressive, he cracked the window. But after that, it went quiet. I didn't hear him anymore, and police made it a few minutes later. The man was gone when the officer searched around the cabin, but eerily, blood was on the window along the cracked glass. The man must have been punching the window with his bare fist so hard that he bled, which made the whole thing even more scary as to how insane he was. I never went back to the cabin after that incident. No other information was found as to who the man was, or what he was attempting that night. Where I live, around Halloween, it always gets pretty cold. Sometimes it snows, sometimes it doesn't, but regardless, that's just how it's always been. This year, on Halloween, it had snowed pretty heavily overnight, and by the time trick-or-treat hours had started, it began snowing again. There weren't too many crowds out because of it. I was just chilling inside at home, handing out candy whenever someone did come by, and watching TV by the fireplace to pass the time. All the kids that came by had heavy jackets or coats covering their whole costumes, so the whole Halloween spirit wasn't really hitting too hard this year. As the night went on, the snow started coming down even harder, which sent pretty much all the kids home that were already stubborn enough to still go out in the cold before. 30 minutes went by, with no kids coming to the door. It was around 7 o'clock, and the sun had already set, so I assumed that the trick-or-treating was done for the night. I got up from the living room and started walking over to the door, but immediately was taken aback. The front door was open, swaying in the cold wind that was blowing into the house. I walked over and looked out, not seeing anyone, then closed it. I stood there and thought about it for a second, figuring I probably just didn't fully close it earlier, whenever the last kids came by, and the wind must have pushed it further open. I mean, I knew I didn't lock it, because it was Halloween, and I was constantly opening it anyway. I let it off as nothing to worry about, and went back to the couch. I did open up the curtains by the window, on my way back, just to watch the snow fall. Another few hours went by, as the night got colder and the snow came down even harsher. I had to check the weather a few times to make sure there wasn't some kind of massive blizzard hitting our town. I think it was around 10 that I started to feel tired enough to go to bed, so I turned everything off and went to the kitchen to finish doing some dishes from dinner that I hadn't cleaned up yet. It was just something I did as part of my nightly routine, cleaning up the place before going to sleep. As I was down there putting things away though, I heard what sounded like a creaking noise above me. I literally stopped what I was doing and stared at the blank ceiling, listening to the sound, until it quietly faded out. I was kind of in awe for a moment. It sounded just like a door opening, which ironically in the moment, I thought sounded way too much like a horror movie to actually be what it was. I finished up downstairs, turned all the lights off, then headed upstairs to go to bed, and check on whatever that sound was that I heard. Honestly, I didn't expect to find anything at all, and didn't really care that much. But when I got to my bedroom, I immediately noticed the closet was open. This changed everything for me, instantly making me unsettled. I put everything together, between the front door being randomly found open, and then this door also suddenly opening. This couldn't be a coincidence. For good measure, I looked into the closet, and didn't see anything. I kinda was hoping there would be something obvious to tell me that something was definitely off. I even checked around the room. I just couldn't see how if someone had snuck inside, why weren't there any other signs of them? Like, where the hell were they? And what was the point of sneaking in, if just to open a few doors? I was still feeling really uneasy, so I shut the bedroom door and locked it, while I paced the room and thought about everything. And at some point, when I happened to be facing the door, I saw something. A shadow right under the door. It only took a few seconds to be almost sure that someone was standing right behind it. I tried not to move or make any sounds, even though, looking back, whoever was behind that door obviously knew I was already in there. I guess I just didn't want them to know that I knew. I must have stood there frozen, staring at the shadow under the door for an entire 2 or 3 minutes. I wanted to call the police, but didn't want them to hear me, which left me just unsure what to do. I think it was actually because I didn't move or make any noise for so long though, that whoever was behind there must have realized something was wrong and that I was probably onto them. Because the doorknob slowly turned a few times, clicking against the lock. Then the shadow moved away from the door. Maybe they recognized I could see the shadow under the door. I don't know. But after that, I waited for probably 10 minutes straight. I didn't hear anything else, or see anything. I had no idea if the person was even still behind the door, let alone in my house. Eventually, I had to call the police, but still tried to be quiet. It seemed like the intruder had left though, because cops walked in and didn't find anyone else in the house. The whole thing is really just a terrifying mess. I can't even imagine what would have happened if I didn't close and lock the door when I did. Even a few minutes later would have changed everything about that night. Obviously, because I never saw the intruder, I had no info to give the police aside from some possible suspects, like crazy exes or whatever, which I didn't really have. There's no saying who it was or what they were going to do. This was 3 years ago on Halloween. Now, in the few days leading up to October 31st, I had a few strange instances while I was at home. I thought at the time it was just some annoying kids ding-dong ditching my house, but after everything that happened, I'm not so sure. A couple times a day, my doorbell would randomly ring, and every time I'd open it, nobody was there. This happened for several days, until Halloween. I made sure to have the day off of work and handed out candy for most of the afternoon. By 8, nobody else was walking around, so I closed and locked up the house, then went upstairs to my bedroom to watch TV in bed for the rest of the night. I was binging one of my shows, and 2 hours went by like nothing before the doorbell rang downstairs. I assumed it was a late trick-or-treater, but I ignored it because they should know that it was way too late by now. I didn't even pause my show. Several minutes passed, so I figured whoever it was had left. But then, the doorbell rang again. Now it was a little strange. Were they just standing outside my door for that whole time, waiting? I felt like now I had to get up and check. I paused the TV and went downstairs, looking out the peephole to see who was on my porch. Nobody was there. That's when I made the connection between this and all the other similar occurrences that happened over the last few days. However, they'd never done it this late though. Something about this time felt different. It gave me chills the longer I looked out at my front porch. I stayed downstairs for a half hour, not feeling safe enough to go back up to my room. Even though I was nervous, I held on to the fact that it very likely could be the same ding-dong ditching that was going on before, which was super frustrating, but ultimately harmless. While I was downstairs, I never heard anyone else outside, or got any signs that anyone was still around. My gut felt like I wasn't totally in the clear, but everything else said otherwise. So I went back upstairs. I left the door to my room open, just in case if anything was going on, I'd hopefully be able to hear it. I continued watching my show for another hour, and after finding myself getting sleepy, I turned it off, got ready for bed, and fell asleep. As it's probably no surprise, I woke up in the middle of the night to the doorbell ringing. I jolted up and stared at the open bedroom door, the sound of the doorbell still echoing through the halls. But something wasn't right about it. It was a different sounding ring. I got out of the bed and walked into the hallway, no idea what the hell was going on. The whole house was dark, but right at the top of the stairs, in the middle of the hall, there was something on the ground. I felt my face go pale because I knew nothing was there before. I walked up to it, and as I got closer, it made that same doorbell sound that had woken me up. It was some kind of recording playback device, just one of those small cheap handheld ones. But more horrifying was thinking about how the hell did it get here? Someone had to be inside my home. This had to be some sort of trap though, knowing the sound would lure me out into the hallway. It was as I came to that realization that I heard a few thumps behind me. I turned around. No one was there, but one of the doors in the hallway was now open. I instantly took off running down the stairs. I went straight to the front door, swinging it open, and almost slamming into a person standing right at the front door. He had on an all-black cloaked costume, with a pale black and white mask over his face. I quickly backed up and slammed the door shut, but heard footsteps sprinting down the stairs I just came from. I ran for the back door, as the front door swung back open, and 2 sets of footsteps came up behind me. I made it out and jumped my fence, then made a dead sprint for the trees. The men didn't seem to be able to follow me. I was able to get help and have the police come over, which of course by then it was kind of pointless. Most likely, this whole thing was some sort of scheme. By ringing the doorbell over and over for a whole week, I was less alarmed when I heard it that night, so I didn't call the police right away. And after breaking in, the men probably just wanted to mess with me by setting up the recorder and everything, just to scare me into running into the man waiting for me at the front door. Basically just 2 unhinged men having fun mentally torturing me, before probably kidnapping me, or maybe even worse. I moved away when I could, and nothing has happened at all since that night. This happened not too long ago, when I was 26. Being older, Halloween hadn't been that big of a deal to me for probably a decade. It was sort of just another day to me. This year, I had most of the day off, but worked overnight from 10 to 6 a.m. I was a stalker for a local grocery store, so most nights were quiet, where I just work alone and at my own pace. By the time I left the house, the streets and sidewalks were already empty. No trick-or-treaters running around. However, when I parked and walked up to unlock the door and let myself in, I saw a couple of people around the side of the building in costumes. Didn't think much of it. Maybe some people just meeting up for whatever reason. I went in and relocked the doors, then started working. I was moving between the back warehouse and the aisles, stocking the shelves and doing all the usual. It really wasn't too long into my shift when I thought I heard someone say something outside the store. I went up to the front and saw that same group of people. They were close to the front windows, looking like maybe they were walking around. For reference, the store sat alone in a massive parking lot. There were some other buildings near it, but all unoccupied, so really the only reason to be in this parking lot was for the grocery store I worked at. But obviously, we weren't open. I stayed near the front and kept an eye on them. They passed by and were gone for 10 minutes, before coming back around. I wish I could have seen more of what they were actually doing, but the costumes they had on made it hard to tell if they were looking inside the store windows, or just standing near them. Either way, it was weird that they were hanging around here for so long, and for no reason. Couldn't see why they didn't walk around somewhere else. Eventually, I had to get back to working in other parts of the store, so I left the front. An hour or so went by. I'd been moving through the aisles, filling the shelves, and having one earbud in to listen to music while I worked. I was in one of the end aisles, far from the front, when I heard a knock at the door. It was 3 loud bangs against the glass. It startled me, but I quickly ran up to the front of the store to see who it was. I immediately saw the 4 guys in costumes, standing grouped up at the front, facing the window I was behind. I knew they saw me, and were clearly looking at me. I walked up closer and yelled through the glass, asking what they needed. As I stood there, I very quickly noticed none of them had bags or pillowcases for trick-or-treating. It would have been weird if they were still trick-or-treating at this time of night, let alone trying to at a closed grocery store, but at least it would have shown me that they might have been earlier, which would explain the costumes. Now it seemed like they were just wearing costumes to hide who they were. Not a single one of their faces was visible, and none of them responded. They just stood there, looking at me. I got really uncomfortable, but thought this could all be some Halloween prank, and honestly wasn't worth my time. I left and went back to the aisle I was in before. I still felt really weird about it, but held on to the idea that they were just doing something stupid to mess with me. Maybe they saw me walking inside earlier and thought it'd be funny. But it very quickly went much further than a simple joke. It wasn't 2 minutes later that there was an insanely loud thud against the glass at the front of the store. And before I could even make it to the end of the aisle to look, a second, even louder thud hit the glass, and was followed by what sounded like the door crashing open. I froze, hearing footsteps running in. I turned and sprinted to the back of the store. I was so scared I didn't even grab my bag that had my keys and wallet in it. I just sprinted straight out the back door, going to the road and continuing to run. When I had a chance to breathe, I called the police. By then, everyone was gone. We did have security footage though, showing exactly what happened, but it really didn't give any information that I didn't already know. The guys were hanging around outside the store for a couple of hours, and then smashed something against the door to break it open. They immediately ran in, and were looking for me, which was the most horrifying part. They searched everywhere, one of them even having run to the back of the store, and looked for me just 15 seconds after I got away. Had he seen me, the whole group might have chased me down the road, and things might have not ended so well for me. Ultimately, that was where things left off. What the group was actually wanting to do, and all the other questions I have, remain unknown.